Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you're not already one of my existing subscribers. Thanks to everyone for tuning in to this video where we're going to discuss a pre-fight breakdown and prediction for Guillermo Rigondeaux versus Vasyl Lomachenko. Now, first things first, I am filming this before work. It's about 7 o'clock in the morning that I'm filming it. You can probably tell that I'm looking a bit tired. Hopefully I'll be able to get my thoughts out somewhat coherently on this and not babble too much. Let's see how it goes on. Rigondeaux versus Lomachenko. There's a lot of factors to consider in this fight, and a lot of the hardcore boxing fans who are messaging me about it are coming at it from a pure stylistic profile. There's a lot of factors to consider in this fight: size, age, activity, all of those things could be key determining factors as we go into this matchup. But people seem to be most interested in the stylistic matchup. So for the first part of this video, let's discuss the two styles of the two guys, and let's put those factors aside. Let's take away age, let's take away size, let's just discuss the styles, the technique, and then we'll come on to those other factors in a few minutes in the second half of this video. Let's say in a mythical world that both of these guys were coming to the ring completely in their prime, and they were coming into the ring at the same size without activity being a factor. Let's just talk about the two guys at their best, at their primes, and let's not focus on the fact that one is substantially smaller than the other. Guillermo Rigondeaux versus Vasyl Lomachenko. I've heard it compared elsewhere to a Mayweather-Pacquiao type fight. And I guess the suggestion is Lomachenko is the Pacquiao. Lomachenko is the volume guy. Lomachenko is the guy with the crazy speed. Lomachenko is the guy who is kind of relentless and who can kind of come at you and continue to come at you like a buzzsaw for round after round after round. Rigondeaux, if you're to use the Mayweather comparison, you would say as the lower volume guy, the guy whose focus is on quality, not quantity. You would say that he's a counter-puncher. You would say he's got excellent timing. You would say that he is a sniper from long range. He sees a gap, has a good punch variety, throws it from range, and has real power, albeit at his respective weight division. And he kind of takes that approach. So I can see stylistically where you could maybe link it to Mayweather-Pacquiao. I guess the perspective is that Lomachenko is going to be the guy coming forward, throwing the more punches, looking to impose himself on the fight, whereas Rigondeaux is going to be the guy looking to pick the openings, looking to find the spots, and looking to catch his opponent clean with a high quality of punch. There's also the suggestion that Rigondeaux may be the bigger puncher of the two, and that that could be a factor in the fight. Now, my take is that if you look at boxing fans and if you say fighter one is a high volume fighter who's going to throw a lot of punches and maybe push the pace of the fight, and fighter two is a lower volume guy who focuses on counter punching with the highest sort of quality and has real one punch hitting power, I think the majority of boxing fans are going to go for Guillermo Rigondeaux on that basis. However, I think that is hugely oversimplifying the equation, and I think it's doing a gross disservice to Vasyl Lomachenko. Guillermo Rigondeaux, an Olympic medalist multiple times, absolutely. But so is Vasyl Lomachenko. Vasyl Lomachenko, for me, is actually a lot more of a refined fighter than Manny Pacquiao. Vasyl Lomachenko has a hell of a lot more going on than just being a volume guy and just being a guy who's going to be the aggressor in this fight. If you look at Vasyl Lomachenko's angles coming forward, the way he switches up angles, it's enough to baffle, confuse opponents, and really create space and room to land punch after punch after punch. If you look at him defensively, I mean, you see people online comparing him to Neo from The Matrix. There's a lot of that there. You see punches being thrown and him just dipping and diving and ducking and weaving underneath them. You know, Lomachenko is not an easy guy to catch clean. You know, people are seeing, Lomachenko as this volume guy against a sort of high-class counter-puncher. Lomachenko is not an easy man to catch clean. You know, the one fight that he's lost, Orlando Salido, that developed into a complete scrap. It developed into a dirty fight, like a war, etc. A real scrap. Yeah, Rigondeaux is not the kind of guy who's going to bring that style to the equation. Rigondeaux's going to be standing off Lomachenko. Rigondeaux's going to trying to be, you know, using his range, using his long arms. Rigondeaux's going to be trying to be a sniper. When you've got that range, it will be an interesting question to see if, with the benefit of that range, Lomachenko can get off his matrix-style defence against the guy who's as higher class as Guillermo Rigondeaux. I see it as an open question, and I think that if you put both guys in the ring together, and not even factoring in size and age and activity and those sort of things, I would view this as a 50-50 type fight. I really would. You know, I think, despite all of Rigondeaux's strengths, I have a few concerns about him, actually. I have concerns about his volume. I think he is incredibly low volume at times in fights. And I think in a fight that, you know, could potentially be competitive, when you're facing a guy who's going to be much higher volume, that could be a difference maker. I have concerns about his punch resistance. You know, we've seen Rigondeaux dropped on several notable occasions in his career, and dropped by people, you know, at lower weight classes than Guillermo Rigondeaux. And I also think some hardcores are slightly overrating the Guillermo Rigondeaux resume. Now, I mentioned this to Irish Tom on the podcast last week, and straight away he started talking about the fact that Guillermo Rigondeaux is an Olympic champion. But with respect, what I pointed out to him is, I'm not asking about who's an Olympic champion. I'm asking about his resume in the pros. You know, when was Guillermo Rigondeaux an Olympic champion? You know, we're talking a long time ago. We're talking nearly a decade ago. Yeah, if we look at Rigondeaux's resume in the pros, for me, you know, there are reasons to have a question mark over it. The only time he faced elite level of opposition was 2013, and that was Nonito Donaire. And you know, subsequent to that fight and around the time of that fight, for me, Nonito Donaire wasn't looking the same fighter as of old. So, yeah, if we're talking elite form on his resume, I think it's somewhat thin on the ground. More recently, you know, subsequent to that 2013 fight, he's fought Agbeko in 13. He's had 2 fights in 14, including the Amagasa fight. Only 1 fight in 15, only 1 fight in 16, and only 1 fight in 17. So, yeah, for me, the last substantial test of Guillermo Rigondeaux's career, yeah, when I say substantial, I'm talking top 3 in the division. That sort of last test came in 2013. Yeah, so you're looking at 4.5 years ago, a bit more than 4.5 years ago since his last substantial test, and that is the only form on his resume that for me represents elite level form. Whereas Lomachenko, I know he's a more recent addition to the boxing scene, if you like, but he fought Gary Russell Jr. in 14, Roman Martinez in 16, Nicholas Walter in 16, Sosa in 16, Mariaga in 17. Yeah, Nicholas Walter, Gary Russell Jr. For me, those are 2 elite level names, and those are 2 guys who represented somewhere towards the top of their respective divisions when they stepped into the ring with Vasyl Lomachenko. So, looking at the 2 guys, you know, I think stylistically they pose very different threats. I think when you're dealing with a low volume counterpuncher, there's always a chance that he could find a higher quality of work, especially with Rigondeaux's long sniper style. When you're dealing with a high output fighter against a low output fighter, when you're dealing against a very fast guy in Vasyl Lomachenko, there's a huge chance he could impose his style. So, looking at those fighters, I think it's stylistically it's a great class. It could be a very competitive fight. I actually have more doubts about Rigondeaux than I do about Lomachenko. My main doubt about Lomachenko is the Salido situation. What would happen if he got dragged into that situation again? But I don't think that's going to happen against Guillermo Rigondeaux, because that's not Rigondeaux's style, and he's substantially smaller than Lomachenko. My doubts about Rigondeaux, the fact that he's been hurt in fights and he's now stepping up multiple weight divisions for this fight is a concern. The fact that I think his resume is overrated and he hasn't been tested at an elite level for 4.5 years is a real concern. And I also think that his volume is potentially a real concern in what could be a close, gritty fight. You know, if the judges are thinking how to score a round, if it's a swing round, I think they're very possibly going to side with the volume guy. So I think the majority of my concerns are at Rigondeaux, and then you've got to take in those factors that I said that I wasn't going to try and focus on in the first part of the video. Guillermo Rigondeaux is now listed as 37 years old on BoxRec. Now, this is 37 years old for a guy who competes at super bantamweight. This is not 37 years old for a guy who competes at heavyweight. It's a guy who competes at a very, very small weight division. And the trend seems to be that the careers are slightly shorter in smaller weight divisions, and that guys don't tend to be successful fighting on to their later years, when they're competing at such small weight classes. So he's fighting a guy in Vasyl Lomachenko who's at 29, probably at his physical peak in terms of age. He's coming into the ring. He's going to be 37 years old, which I think is a concern. Activity is also a concern for Rigondeaux. Pardon me. 3 fights in as many years. Moses Flores, James Jazza Dickens, Drian Francisco, none of them representing elite competition. So activity is a real problem. You know, if we look at the period from 2015 onwards, Vasyl Lomachenko has had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So Lomachenko's had double the amount of fights they've been at against better names. You know, there isn't a Jason Sosa, a Nicholas Walters, even a Roman Martinez on Guillermo Rigondeaux's resume in that period of time for me. Rigondeaux, I'm concerned about the age. I'm very concerned about the activity. When you've got a combination of aging and activity, it creates an open question. You know, we know Rigondeaux looked like a very, very, very good fighter when he beat Nonito Donaire in 2013. But could he have faded during that time? I mean, that was 4.5 years ago. He was 32 when that fight happened. He's now 37. Could he have faded? Could he have slipped substantially? But that not have been exposed and that not have been brought to the forefront based on the fact that he hasn't been competing against as high a standard of opposition. I think that's a real threat. You know, I'm not sure that Guillermo Rigondeaux, we can be confident, is the same guy who fought the net. And then we've got to factor in size. And people don't like talking about size because it's too simple, too basic. Some people think I talk about size too much. I think size is a really pivotal question in this fight. You know, Rigondeaux, he's been campaigning at super bantamweight. Looking at Rigondeaux and looking at competition between him and other super bantamweights, he looks very small at that weight for me. He's a bantamweight or a small super bantamweight, depending on how you look at it. You know, you look at the guys who've been campaigning at super bantamweight in recent years. I know a lot of the big names have left the division, but look at Leo Santa Cruz, look at Scott Quigg, look at Carl Frampton. You know, I believe if you stuck these guys at super bantamweight next to Guillermo Rigondeaux, they look substantially bigger than him. So we're not just talking about Guillermo Rigondeaux being a small super bantamweight fighting a big super bantamweight. We're actually talking about not one weight class, but the weight class above that. So you have bantamweight, where I believe Rigondeaux should be, if we're talking about natural size. Super bantamweight, where he's been campaigning. Featherweight, super featherweight, where Vasyl Lomachenko is. It's a substantial gap. And people talk about the fact that there's lesser distance between the weight classes at that level, at that weight. And that is mathematically correct. However, you've also got to factor in that when you're dealing with individuals who are that small, the percentage difference is potentially substantial. And the difference in 5 or 6 pounds between weights when you're only fighting at whatever it is, 120, 130 pounds, etc. It is a substantial weight difference. So I think there's a lot against Guillermo Rigondeaux inside the ring. I think there's a lot against him outside the ring. I'm not sure Rigondeaux is going to be the same guy who fought Linares. I think there's a high potential that he slipped during that period due to the fact he is now 37 and due to the fact he's been so inactive and has fought a so-so level of competition, in my opinion, especially compared to Lomachenko's opinion. I think there's a lot against Guillermo Rigondeaux. I think that there are simply too many hurdles for him to jump over to pick him in this fight. I think in Vasyl Lomachenko, we have a guy who's looked supreme in recent fights against higher standard of opposition, against guys at the weight class this fight is going to be fought at. We've got a guy who is very defensively blessed. We've got a guy who is offensively capable and brings a combination of a high volume approach compared with a real classy, quality degree of work to his offense. And I think he's fighting a guy who's a smaller guy, an older guy, a guy who very possibly has lost a step, a guy who's been inactive, certainly against a higher standard of opposition. And I think Rigondeaux is probably going to look to stand off Rigondeaux, counter him, time him, land a high quality of work against him. Yeah, I think Lomachenko is every bit as well versed defensively, and I don't think he's going to be an easy guy to counter and time and weigh up like that. Potentially, this fight may not actually be as competitive as people think it will be in the ring. I appreciate that Rigondeaux is a stylistic nightmare for many. I appreciate that he's going to be a very awkward, well-schooled, technical guy to try and figure out and to try and work out in the ring. But I think after a period of adjustment, Lomachenko has the ability to get his work off against Rigondeaux. I think he's got the ability to time Rigondeaux and to really impose himself, put the pace, put the power on Rigondeaux. I know Rigondeaux is known as a very, very big puncher, but I do think that's somewhat relative to the level of opposition in terms of size and in terms of quality that he's been in with. Specifically in terms of size, he's a very, very big puncher at bantamweight or super bantamweight, certainly at super bantamweight where he's been campaigning. Does that mean that he's going to be a very, very big puncher at super featherweight? I'm not so sure. It's a hard fight to call, but I think for the reasons I've discussed in this video, I think that even if you take the factors of age, activity, size out of it, I still think it's a very competitive fight. But putting those into it, I think the chips are against Guillermo Rigondeaux here. I'm picking Vasyl Lomachenko. I think he'll win the fight, and I think he'll win the fight with a little bit in hand. I think he will be able to impose his style on Guillermo Rigondeaux after a few rounds. I think he will noticeably be the bigger man in there, the younger man in there, the faster man in there. I think he will impose a real substantial amount of volume that Guillermo Rigondeaux is not able to match. And I actually don't think the gap in quality of punches will be vast. Lomachenko is a real sharpshooter. He can counterpunch. He's got excellent timing. He's got excellent combinations. He's got a huge arsenal of different punches, different movements in his resume. You know, I don't see this as a Mayweather-Pacquiao matchup that I've seen it described elsewhere. I'm going Vasyl Lomachenko. Gun to my head, I'm going Vasyl Lomachenko by stoppage. I just think he'll prove too much from Rigondeaux. I do have, as I've raised in the video, I don't think Rigondeaux's punch resistance is grade A, and I think up against the bigger, younger man, I think I'm going to back Lomachenko to squeeze the stoppage here. I know this is not necessarily going to be the most popular video think the trendy opinion in boxing, certainly the ones that the hardcores and the hipsters have, if you like, is that Guillermo Rigondeaux is some unstoppable sniper who will be able to catch Vasyl Lomachenko with everything he throws. But you know, for me, there's just too much against him to pick him going into this fight. Let me know your thoughts, people. Who are you predicting to win this fight? Who do you? What method of victory are you choosing? Do you agree with my analysis? Leave your comments in the section below. If you've enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, you haven't done so before, please do subscribe. Check me out on Twitter at Boxing Gossip. You can add me as a friend on Facebook using the link in the description box below. As always, many thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you guys watching my channel.